Howdy folks, welcome to the channel. I'm Don. I'm taking a look today on verses that were added later to the Bible perhaps, or were just outright forgeries. I'm not sure where Robyn Walsh, Dr. Robyn Walsh is going to go with this. She's a professor at the University of Miami of, it's got to be beyond New Testament studies, but she's very learned and has a very nice disposition, if you will, very nice way of presenting what she's got to say. She's not a proselytizer. She's an informationalist. It's a word I made up, but she presents really good information. So we're going to get into this. Somebody had made a comment in the channel the other day that the King James Version is like the perfect version of the Bible or something. And I was like, well, no, there are actually a lot of issues with that one, as with any translation. It's not to knock the King James translators or translation, but you could even look in 1 John 5:7 or many of the places in the King James where they actually, this is a very thoughtful way of going about it, but whenever there's an addition, they're adding a word or some kind of context, they italicize it. So it's in italics. And so you could tell that wasn't in the original text. But anytime you translate something from one language to the next or one language to another, it's fraught with difficulties because language is not this linear process. There are words in some languages that don't exist in other languages. There are expressions like the movie when it came out, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Well, when they did that in Japan, there was no term of endearment for the word honey, I shrunk the kids. So they had to come up with a different word that kind of captured the sense. And that's where the challenges lie for the translators. What did this person mean when, they said whatever was said? But there are some actual forgeries in the texts that either a scribe or someone else wanted to assert authority over certain church members or get obeisance to the governor and so on. But let's see what Robyn's got to say. And this is just so that you can know, actually have more of the full picture about whether or not you're going to consider the Bible the unadulterated Word of God. It fits like a hand in a glove. There's no stamp of humanity on it. It was dictation. People dutifully wrote down what they were told to write, and God saw to it that it would be protected throughout time until Christ returns and Judgment Day and all this. It's sort of like the simple package here. But let's see what we've got. I'm agnostic, by the way, if you couldn't tell by the channel name, agnostic philosopher, but I do have a theological background as well.
Hey everyone, I'm with the Bart Ehrman team. My name is Robyn Walsh. I'm a scholar of New Testament and early Christianity, and I'm actually about to run off to class. But I thought I would make a video about something that will probably come up in lecture today, which is which passages from the canonical Gospels were maybe not original to the canonical Gospels as best we can tell, or maybe were added later. I think one really interesting example is the passage or the scene of Jesus and the woman found in adultery. I might call it sometimes the adulterous woman passage. That passage is really beloved in a lot of ways, I think for two primary reasons. One is we're all fairly familiar with it, not necessarily because everyone reads the Gospels, but if you've ever seen a TV show or a movie involving Jesus, usually that scene comes up. And it also usually comes up, and here's the second point, in association with Mary Magdalene. However, there's something you should know. That passage and some of our earliest papyri of the Gospel of John isn't there. In fact, it floats around in the Gospel of Luke at some point. It seems to have been added later. The Greek is a little bit different from both Luke and from John, but John as a gospel is a little disjointed. We could talk more about that in another lecture. It actually seems to be a little bit out of order, and there are some amusing theories in scholarship about how that may have come to be. But because the vignettes in John are already a little bit disjointed, it was easy to take a passage, again, maybe it was historical and just added later because someone learned about it, or maybe someone invented it. Either way, it was added to John because it was a little bit less awkward to put it into that particular gospel. And we'll try to put an image up here of a piece of papyri from the Gospel of John where that passage is absent. But that association with Mary Magdalene, let me go back to that for a second. Because that passage eventually makes its way into John, And so you have the adulterous woman, but Mary Magdalene is mentioned within close proximity to that story in John. There was a Pope Gregory in the 6th century who did an Easter sermon where he suggested that Mary Magdalene was that sinful woman. If you
Right.
go back to those passages, that's actually not what the text necessarily says. But sort of like this being a beloved scene for various reasons, this association between Mary Magdalene as sort of the redeemed sinner or the sinful woman
prostitute.
who makes a turn to, a more respectable life, I guess you might say. But because that passage was so beloved for various reasons, whether it was because Mary, as a formerly sinful person who sees the error of her ways reputedly, or because of this idea of redemption that comes across and making that association, that became so beloved that it has stuck in our imaginations. So I think there's a lot for us to consider with that particular passage about not only what's going on historically with the text, but also about ourselves. So I would say that's my
Good
favorite
point.
example.
We tend to forgive certain inconveniences or overlook them if they favor what we want to believe or already believe, and they frequently go hand in hand. I know when I rewrote the New Testament in my own words, I'm not a linguist, so I don't speak Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic, but I decided I wanted to see where the gaps in my understanding were in the New Testament. And it took a year and a half. I worked off of 6 radically different English translations, and one of which I still remember, the MIT. It was so pedantic. It would get me angry on occasion. Like, I cannot believe anybody who works with language would think that this is the way people should read these texts or anybody should translate them. And then you had more common, modern, contemporary vernacular. I may have worked off of the NIV. I probably did. King James, Darby Bible, and total was 6. And it was amazing at how different the texts were. There was almost no uniform agreement on how many texts should be translated. There were always differences, but frequently none were uber major. On the flip side, there were some verses that all 6 completely agreed with one another on the translation. And I was like, oh, if these people agree on it, this is what the original said, because these folks varied in their opinions in translation. And that's why I say, if you think any version of the Bible, including the King James, is perfect, it's not. It's fraught with difficulties. And she just outlined the one vignette in there, but how John factors into various things, and the epistles, 1 John 5:7, and how various words and even verses work their way into the texts. But if we favor a particular idea, we're going to go with it. I discovered, and I went in to prove the opposite in a sense. I discovered when I did my paraphrastic version, it took a year and a half, and I worked on it every day. After about 4 months, a slow creeping realization was cropping up that the Bible was not written by God. It wasn't written by Jesus. It was written by people. And I know that sounds odd to an atheist. It would sound idiotic to make that. Of course it's written by people because there's no God. I'm saying in terms of those who believe the New Testament, and I'm not saying I do. I have grave issues with it. But I didn't used to until I rewrote it. The dictation theory went right out the window, because so many times did the author say, I'm giving you my opinion, I'm giving you my judgment. And Paul even says it expressly in multiple places. I'm giving you my judgment. I am not the Lord. This is my opinion. And I'm like, oh my God, well, that right there contradicts the notion that God told him to write this. The very beginning of Luke 1:1-4. Now, Luke was written, 60 to 80 years after Christ was crucified. And so the only way that it really could be completely believable is the dictation theory, which is why people kind of love this theory, that it's perfect. The whole thing is perfect, including Luke. But Luke says because many others gave their account of things that happened, I did my research so that I could present to you, O excellent Theophilus, an orderly account of the things that happened before us, not in front of us, but prior to us. It's like, oh, so this is a research work. And it doesn't necessarily mean the work was wrong any more than anybody researching the civil rights marches or any period in history would be necessarily wrong. But it does reflavor how you read those texts. So anyway, she's got a little bit left to go. Let's see where she goes.
Now, if you're interested in this topic, Bart Ehrman is going to be giving a talk on February 20th called Lost in Translation, where...
Okay. All right. So I kind of thought she was going in the direction because I've seen a few of her videos where she would either promo something she was doing or Bart was doing. And I like Bart's stuff. But this is just a little bit for you to consider as far as how reliable are the texts. And I'm not trying to talk anybody out of their faith because it doesn't faze me if somebody believes or doesn't believe. But it is good to have the relevant, more of the relevant information so that, it was a benefit. Like the truth will set you free. It can make you miserable at first, but it'll set you free ultimately. So there you go. All right. Thank you, Robyn, too. Should you see this, I know you're a busy, busy woman, a busy, busy girl traveling abroad right now. So, all right, folks, have a great day. See you on another video and keep thinking philosophy. Hey, folks, if you want to take the personality test that I created for my life coaching practice, which is based on the book that I wrote, put your phone up, turn it on camera, and focus on this, and it'll take you to it. And it'll take you about 20 minutes to complete the test. It's free, and you'll get some information on your personality. It's quite detailed, quite revealing. It's kind of fun as well. And I'll be leaving this QR code up on the wall behind me for my regular videos. So I hope you take it, and I hope you enjoy it.